the nuclear sector deal. Luke Pollard.
And I'd like to thank the member for Copeland for securing this really important debate. Nuclear jobs are good jobs, and they're often located in cities and towns where finding other good jobs in other sectors are rare. So I welcome the nuclear sector deal. I believe in a mixed energy policy with a greater focus on renewables and carbon minimising generation from nuclear. And I'm a fan of new nuclear, but in the constituency I represent, in Plymouth, Sutton, Devonport, it's home to nuclear jobs, but not civil nuclear jobs, defence jobs. And in particular in our dockyard, which is the sole nuclear repair and refuelling facility for the Royal Navy. Now, nuclear jobs are in demand, and recruiters for civil nuclear regularly try and poach the highly skilled people from our dockyard and the Royal Navy. And rightly they should, as Devonport's nuclear workers are amongst the best in the business. I pay tribute to their work, which is often overlooked, but appreciated by all those who value the contribution of our submarine service, both the bombers and the hunter-killers, to our nation's security. Nuclear jobs are not like financial services jobs in the heart of the capital. They're in the regions, and rightly so, in the northwest and in the southwest. Although I don't always agree with the somewhat high strike price agreed for new civil nuclear, there's no doubt in my mind that civil nuclear has a bright future ahead. However, I want to confine my remarks to talk about defence nuclear, where there's a little bit more uncertainty around some of this part of the world. Now, military nuclear matters, and I welcome the albeit brief mention in the nuclear sector deal of greater cooperation between civil and defence nuclear. I believe we need to do much more to enhance collaboration and cooperation between these two sectors, not just in research, but in jobs, skills and training, and importantly, in decommissioning as well. Now, the civil nuclear decommissioning programme enjoys cross-party support, and rightly so. The taxpayer has unlimited liability to clean up the nation's civil nuclear legacy and clean up the sites contaminated by our country's exploration of civil nuclear and now its mastery of nuclear energy. It is right that new nuclear has decommissioning costs built into it. But while there's been progress on the civil side with nuclear decommissioning, that has not been the case with defence nuclear. Members may not know that every single nuclear submarine the UK has ever had, we still have. And it's time that this legacy with old submarines has been dealt with. Devonport Dockyard, and the constituency that I represent, has 13 laid-up nuclear submarines awaiting dismantling. Rosyth in Scotland has 7, and there are more to come. In Devonport, the oldest sub in storage is HMS Valiant. At 54 years old, she was launched in 1963 at the height of the Cold War. Many have been stored for decades, including HMS Conqueror, which famously sank the Belgrano in the Falklands War. As a proud Janner and a Plymouth lad, I've grown up knowing about these subs, but far too many people don't know about them. Don't they just go away, was how one person responded when I told them about these new subs. Well, no, they don't. These nuclear submarines get stored because the UK has no funded programme to recycle them. And 8 in Devonport still have nuclear fuel rods and have not been defueled yet. There is no risk to local communities of these old nuclear submarines, and it's worth stating that, Mr Owen, because there's all too frequently, with nuclear debates, a question about safety. But there are no risks to our local communities, but we can't ask Plymouth and Rosyth to look after these submarines indefinitely without a plan. To make matters worse, time is running out. In the next 5 years, 3 more Trafalgar-class submarines will need to be stored somewhere, as they're being replaced by the Astute class being built in Barrow. A decade later, the 4 Vanguard-class nuclear submarines, the Trident subs, will need to be stored when they're taken out of service and replaced by the new Dreadnought-class submarines. There has been a pilot project underway to dismantle HMS Swiftsure, which is a submarine my old man served on, but after much delay, this programme has been paused and progress has not been made at the pace it needs to if we're to deal with the rest of the submarines. The reason I'm taking us on this detour into military nuclear, rather than civil nuclear, which is the focus of the nuclear deal, is to make the case for greater collaboration between the defence and civil nuclear sectors. The workforce moves between these two sectors as just the science of decommissioning, but at the moment, government still deals with them as 2 very, very distinct separate silos. Where there is an efficiency in collaboration and approach, ministers of all governments, including my own in the past, have kept them apart. And I say to the Minister, I think it is time for this generation of politicians and this generation of ministers to grasp this and change it. This is an issue that unites all parties, the need to deal with nuclear legacy of our old nation's nuclear submarines. This is why, together with the member for Copeland and the member for Rosyth, we've launched a cross-party campaign for our nation's military nuclear legacy to be dealt with. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister and other party leaders, we asked them to commit to fund a proper programme of recycling the UK's legacy and retired Royal Navy submarines. Successive governments have refused to act, but I don't think that's an option anymore. Recycling old submarines is not cost-free, and the MOD's current battle with the Treasury, there seems to be more pressing priorities for the limited funding. But we cannot wait any longer, and that's why I'm looking to BEIS ministers in particular and to the civil side to help us solve this urgent problem. A clear timetable for funding and dismantling and a recycling programme is needed, and we believe that to achieve this, we can beg, steal and borrow the principles from the Civil Nuclear Decommissioning and Waste Management Programme. We've called for a political consensus to recycle these old submarines and to use the principles of civil nuclear decommissioning, especially the principles that are used by the Civil Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, allocating additional funding to its work, including these nuclear submarines. The taxpayer is rightly paying to clean up old nuclear power stations around the nation. But at the moment, the same funding streams and principles, the unlimited liability set out in law, has not extended to old nuclear submarines, and it needs to. Civil nuclear power may be built in metres of foundations, and defence nuclear power may be built in floating hulls, but fundamentally the principles are the same. As well as being the right thing to do, expanding the civil nuclear clean-up budget to include nuclear submarines can turn an economic problem into an economic asset. The programme of work would create new jobs in Plymouth, Rosyth, Capenhurst and West Cumbria. But above all, this is in the national interest. Plymouth and Rosyth cannot be asked to store old nuclear submarines indefinitely. That's why we need a properly funded plan using the same principles as civil nuclear clean-up and to recycle these submarines safely, sustainably and securely. I think the public are genuinely surprised and concerned to hear of the existence of these submarines. And I invite members to look on Google Maps, find Plymouth, look on the west side of Plymouth, and you'll see the submarines on Google Earth lined up alongside each other. When you see them there, you'll realise that we have to do something about them. Not knowing about them meant that we've been able to ignore them, but we can't ignore them any longer. There's just one mention of submarines in the nuclear sector deal, and I appreciate that the nuclear sector deal was written in particular to look at the civil nuclear side. And that mention was about the equipment qualification. And while I agree with the thrust that greater expertise, applicability and agile companies in our nuclear sector will enhance British competitiveness, there's a market at home for this nuclear decommissioning work, even before we look for new markets abroad. I know the Minister has agreed to meet with me and the member for Copeland and Rosyth to discuss this topic, and I think that there's a positive way forwards. To do that, we need to understand that these nuclear submarines exist, they do need to be dealt with, and there is already an existing structure and principles and funding, and importantly, a cross-party basis for their recycling in the future. And I ask the Minister to look carefully with his officials at how that work can be extended so we deal with this legacy once and for all. Thank you.